The House Select Committee has been investigating what transpired in our nation's capital on January 6th, and they held their first hearing, public hearing on the matter, where they showed some of the evidence that they've compiled through their investigation. Now, while I certainly have my criticisms for Liz Cheney, she did a pretty good job in making concise arguments and presenting pretty compelling evidence, beginning with what she describes as a meeting that was held in the White House between Michael Flynn, Powell, and Giuliani, where they addressed having the military seize voting machines and using other maneuvers to essentially steal the 2020 election on behalf of Donald Trump. Let's watch.
On December 18th, 2020, a group including General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others visited the White House. They stayed late into the evening. We know that the group discussed a number of dramatic steps, including having the military seize voting machines and potentially rerun elections. You will also hear that President Trump met with that group alone for a period of time before White House lawyers and other staff discovered the group was there and rushed to intervene. A little more than an hour after Ms. Powell, Mr. Giuliani, General Flynn, and the others finally left the White House, President Trump sent the tweet on the screen now, telling people to come to Washington on January 6th. Be there, he instructed them. Will be wild.
So the Select Committee did a good job in building the entire narrative. What transpired prior to January 6th, what kind of meetings were held in the White House, and there's a lot more to get to, including how much of an impact Donald Trump had on the rioters on that very day. Before we get to all of that, though, I want to open it up to the panel and get your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll start by saying this. I'll double down on the Liz Cheney comment. I can't stand the Cheneys. I hate that we need them to be effective here. But I mean, the Democrats on their own, oh boy, right? So I'm glad she's here to at least shepherd this process. I'll vote against her in every other way for the rest of the time. But it was a really strong presentation. The video that they showed of the rioters, including the times involved, were really strong. And one of the points I wanted to make there is Donald Trump knows the Capitol's been breached. He knows that Mike Pence life was in danger. He talked to Tommy Tuberville about it at around 2:15 that day. And then he goes on to wait for 2 more hours before he puts out the video telling everybody to go home. And in the videos that they showed of the rioters, they read his tweets to the crowd. So there is no question that they're, and over and over again in the crowd, they say, we're here for Trump, we're here for Trump, we did it for Trump. So any talk of them being Antifa is now, I mean, it was always ridiculous, but you'd have to deny every fact in the world to say that. The fact that they were doing it for him is undeniable. The fact that he did not put out that order for them to go home or that request for them to go home for 2 hours at least is undeniable. They breached the Capitol grounds actually 3 hours earlier, and he certainly did not have a concern about Mike Pence being hanged. We could talk about that more a little bit later, but it was devastating all around. And the idea that they were tourists, remember Republican congresspeople said, oh, they were just tourists stopping by. As you see them viciously beat and tear apart cops, all of that is put to rest. In the real world, there's no question about any of that anymore.
So let me jump in. Sorry about that, David, because Cenk had referenced the hang Mike Pence portion, and I actually want to get to that video because they put together a video with the time of the day to show how everything progressed or devolved, really. And so the hang Mike Pence part of it was really compelling. Let's take a look at this never before shown video, which they used in their presentation.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. The U.S. demands the truth. Bring out proof.
So you hear them chanting "Hang Mike Pence." That video begins with a tweet that one of the rioters is reading out loud to a group of rioters by Donald Trump, right? So it's essentially them taking orders from Donald Trump in real time, showing the kind of impact and influence he had over them as the riot was taking place. And I think that's an important part of this, right? Because so far, in terms of our justice system and in terms of anyone who's faced any consequences for their criminality here, it's been ordinary people who, yes, broke the law and should suffer the consequences. But when you look at the influence and the incitement that was carried out by people at the very top, members of the Trump administration, people like Rudy Giuliani, who on that day used the words, called for a trial by combat. No, I mean, it's time for them to suffer the consequences for what they did. And it seems like that's the case that they're building here. I mean, there's obviously oodles of evidence to prove it. But David, what do you think the likelihood is that this will even get anywhere?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think it could get somewhere in terms of public opinion, because part of this is not just defending the Constitution. And there was a certain seamlessness last night, a certain sort of solemnness to this hearing. It felt big. It didn't feel like the normal congressional hearing, which is derailed because of partisan sniping. This felt big. So that's the first part, defending that this isn't about partisan politics. This is about defending the Constitution. It also felt like it was about defending reality. And mixed in with that was the point you just made, in that there was also news in all of this, because we've all heard the video clips of "Hang Mike Pence," but to actually see for the first time somebody on that megaphone reading Donald Trump's tweet and then the response being "Hang Mike Pence," it makes a connection that I think to a lot of people might have been lost until this point. That people could say, oh, well, Donald Trump didn't really inspire people. They weren't really responding to Donald Trump with "Hang Mike Pence." No, now you see it. It's right there on the video, and it's presented in a way that's hard to deny.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cenk, you had brought to our attention another element of this, another facet of this, which was what Donald Trump had to say about Mike Pence's life behind the scenes. He didn't really seem to have much concern for it.
Yeah, so guys, the timing here is also critical. So at 2:15, actually even before 2:15, he sends about a half a dozen tweets from the night before to that afternoon, blaming Mike Pence, saying it's all on Mike Pence. Mike Pence has to do the right thing. He mentions Mike Pence repeatedly in his speech. Then at 1 o'clock, they breached the Capitol grounds. At around 2 o'clock, they breached the building. Tommy Tuberville gets on the phone with Donald Trump. Trump accidentally called Mike Lee. Mike Lee hands the phone to Tommy Tuberville, senator from Alabama now. And Tuberville tells him Mike Pence had to be escorted out of the building because they were worried about his life, and Secret Service got him out of here. So at that point, Trump definitively knows that Mike Pence's life is in danger, and he still sends out that tweet at 2:24, 9 minutes later, and then they start chanting "Hang Mike Pence" even more. And apparently, once they breached the building at around that juncture, they barely missed Mike Pence. It took Pence a while to get out of the building, and they barely missed him by a couple of minutes. As you watch the entire video that they showed yesterday in the hearings, not only about Pence, but about Nancy Pelosi, as they are going throughout the whole building chanting "Nancy, Nancy," and then they get to her office. If they found her, or if they found Pence, it would be shocking if they didn't murder them. They were chanting about murdering them. They went in with that intent. They had nooses. And so it is just, how do you watch that and then go, man, this is no big deal? No, it was a giant deal where they went to go kill our legislators, including their own vice president. And then again, guys, Trump doesn't even deny it. So they claim in the hearings, and for now, they just said it. They haven't shown the evidence yet. But Cheney explained that the president said, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea when asked about attacking Pence, and that, quote, he deserves it. Okay, so let's see if they got the goods on that later in the hearings. But we already know that when Trump talked to Jonathan Karl, Karl asked him, they were saying "Hang Mike Pence," and Trump's response was, quote, because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress? How can you do that? He was asked, they were chanting hang Mike Pence, and that was his response. That it was common sense to say that, and that it was Pence's fault. He was gonna get his own vice president murdered. If you still support him, I mean, now at least you know why we call you fascist.
Yeah, and the real big lie here is the complete cover up of what really transpired by the right wing. Fox News has failed to cover it. In fact, they would cut away as soon as there was any footage that was very clearly violent. And in the video that was put together by the select committee, there was a moment where the video shows the violence of the crowd with Donald Trump referring to them as anything but. So let's take a quick look at that.
Peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
And some might argue, like, how the hell can you see that and deem what happened that day to be peaceful, or deem those people to be peaceful people? And we talk about this all the time, but these filter bubbles, these news bubbles, absolutely do exist. And you have a huge portion of this country that gets all of their news from either Fox or Newsmax, OAN. And let's go to graphic 3 here, because I think the way that the hearing was covered on Fox News is telling. This is a tweet from Ben Collins, who says Fox News isn't showing the video of actual violence. It's too damning. They're showing panned out shots of Congress people watching it. So instead of showing the actual video, they showed video of Congress people watching the video. They really don't think their viewership can handle the truth of what happened on January 6th. And to further that point, let's go to graphic 2 here, where Matthew Gertz tweets that Tucker Carlson went the whole hour without a break. Fox is desperate to keep its viewers from switching to another channel and seeing the hearing in real time. And David, I know where Cenk stands on this issue, but I'm curious what you think, right? So do you think the portion of the country, the portion of the Republican Party, which is most of them, who think the election was stolen from Donald Trump, do you think that they genuinely believe it? Or do you think that they're just lying and acting in bad faith because they don't really care about democracy and they want to just keep the country under the power of someone they like Donald Trump?
Well, we've had the fortune to go to a couple of Trump rallies and ask people, and they genuinely believe that the election was stolen, that the evidence was there, that this was not Joe Biden's victory, that Donald Trump won in a landslide. Now, when you ask them, well, where do you get that? They say, well, I got it from Donald Trump, but it's obvious. How could Joe Biden have won? So at least the supporters of Donald Trump, this is something they really believe. But I loved how in the hearing, the violence was made more effective in terms of that video because of how the hearing started, by starting with Bill Barr, who, by the way, was somebody that I couldn't stand as Attorney General for literally every point until right before his resignation. And we come to find out that in December of 2020, he's telling Donald Trump that it is BS to Donald Trump, this election fraud is nonsense. To start the hearing that way and say somebody like Bill Barr, who was such a darling of so many conservatives and Republicans, that even he said it was nonsense, lays the groundwork to make the point that this was all built on lies. There was no evidence here. And that's what makes the violence then even more reprehensible and frustrating to see.
And I want to just say one quick thing about the bubble that the right wing lives in. They only watch right wing media. So all the things where we pull our hair out and go, can you believe that they think this? Well, they never actually saw most of the facts. So to me, the most telling part was that Fox wouldn't even go to commercial breaks because they're worried that their audience is going to accidentally see some of the truth. They need them trapped in that bubble of propaganda that they have. As long as they're in the confines of that bubble, they can feed them any lie. It doesn't matter. They can shield them from the truth, and as long as their eyes never see it, they'll think that the people that were there were tourists and Antifa and American patriots, etc. So, is there a lack of logic in some of that? Of course. do some of them subconsciously know, of course we didn't win? And does it really bother them that white people aren't going to be in power anymore? Well, obviously, look at the polling, 58 to 70% of Republicans now saying that the white replacement theory is real and they're gonna replace white people. They're obviously not gonna take them out of the country. They're saying they're gonna replace our power. We don't want that. We don't want minorities to have power. So both things can be true at the same time. But the right-wing media is obsessed with making sure that their voters do not see reality.
And I would say that actually Fox News did the country a favor by not broadcasting the hearing, because now there's no hiding who Fox News really is. There's a significant portion of this country, mostly in the middle, but a little bit to the right, who think Fox News is just a center-right news organization. That they have their opinion, folks like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, but they've got straight news folks like Bret Baier. No, anybody who had any principle at all, a Bret Baier, anybody else who's on the news side, who saw that Fox News was not covering this hearing, if they had any shame, they would quit. They have not, because the money, I guess, is so good at Fox News. These are not journalists. This is not a news organization. It's not a center-right news organization. It is part of the fascist apparatus that you guys have been talking about.
I hope you're right. I mean, I think people who are paying attention and people who already knew that Fox News was just propaganda have only had their beliefs reinforced by this. But what really stood out to me this morning, and actually this has been trending throughout the day on Twitter, was this. Let's take a look. This was trending in the politics section. Vote Republican. Like, how do you, like the day after the first night of the hearing, where you're seeing all of this video, I mean, again, they probably didn't see it, depending on which news organization they're watching as the hearing was taking place. But yeah, fairly recently, we grabbed that screen grab, 50,000 tweets under the trending topic of vote Republican. So look, I think that Democrats are, the way they're handling this in terms of the investigation, I think the hearing went really well, and I think that they're handling it correctly. And I agree with Cenk, they're doing it under the leadership of Liz Cheney of all people. But when you take a step back, there are other issues at play that have a huge impact on Americans' everyday lives. Inflation is a problem, crime is a problem. Yes, progressives, please acknowledge it. It is in fact a problem across the country. And so when you talk about these very real bread and butter issues, that is always gonna take priority over what happened or what transpired last year, unfortunately. So if Democrats are putting all of their eggs in this January 6th select committee basket, and they think that's gonna be enough to fend off Republican challengers in elections, I think they're sadly mistaken, and we all suffer as a result of that.
Yeah,
Look, you got the politics exactly right. I think the analysis of the politics is spot on. But what was so refreshing, I think, from the hearing was that this felt like it was above politics. That if the Democrats were smart and they really cared about 2022, instead of perhaps focusing so much on January 6th, maybe there's an effort to somehow rehabilitate Joe Biden or talk about some of these bread and butter issues, because there is a perception in certain parts of our society, the more you talk about January 6th, you're somehow not focused on dealing with inflation or gas prices and on and on. But again, for history's sake, and that's where I think 20, 30, 40 years from now, people will look back and say, these hearings were important. Because even if Democrats get killed in the 2022 midterms, or it's a problem in 2024, because Democrats seem to be perceived as focusing on something that most Americans don't really care about anymore, history will record whether or not the United States recorded, and whether or not the Constitution was protected at a time when it was under fire.
Yeah, so look, both sides always accuse each other of distraction. Most of the time it's nonsense. Claire McCaskill on MSNBC is saying that inflation, Mitch McConnell talking about inflation is a distraction from the hearings. The Republicans say the hearings are a distraction from inflation. Nonsense. They're both very real issues. There are real distractions, critical race theory, trans, high school sports, etc. The Republicans love those distractions, but inflation is not one of them, and certainly these hearings are not one of them. These are massive issues, and I want to show the last video here of Officer Edwards talking about what she saw there, and then make a last comment. Let's watch.
What I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I had seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, They were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, they had, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
And as you watch the whole video, there's no question that it looked like a war scene. So, and guys, this is a bad note to end on, but I was a little worried by the end that if the Republican voters did actually get to see the video, that some of them might be energized by it, that they might have liked that violence and thought like, oh, next time I'd like to be there too. Of course, all the hypocrisies about Blue Lives Matter, and they're beating the living crap out of the cops, and some of them died. And there's no question it's a riot. In fact, you see the cops yelling in, "We got a riot situation, we're declaring a riot," and they're asking for backup, And because Trump liked what was going on, they never received that backup. And a lot of them were incredibly brave. But as our country now stands on the brink of potential violence, I don't know what's gonna happen next, but we are in very dangerous, very scary times.
Well, I was just gonna say, I would say it reminded me of something sort of medieval, but I'll never forget talking to a Trump supporter a couple months ago, said, well, it really wasn't that violent because the protesters, they didn't fire guns. And the Capitol Police, aside from Ashley Babbitt, they didn't fire guns to protect the Capitol. So how bad could it have been? And to me, that gets to, well, look, if these were, 10,000 Black Lives Matter protesters were trying to storm the Capitol, the cops would have opened fire. As much as I love the Capitol Police, they would have mowed everybody down. You would have had hundreds of people killed. Why they did not start shooting at these people, I think because they're white, because they were Trump supporters, I think they gave them a little bit of slack, but that doesn't negate the fact that this was a threat to our democracy. This was an effort for a coup, even if it was not a coup that did not involve guns by the people who were storming the Capitol, even though they had them on them.